I am telling you for the last time, you are trespassing. Leave this instant.
I have every right to be here. You can't just deny me access like this.
They called the cops on me over a trash can. Yeah, you heard that right, a trash can. And even now, when I think about that moment, it still feels unreal. At first, I honestly thought it was some kind of misunderstanding, or maybe a joke, because there's no way someone would actually call the police for something that small, right? I still remember that evening clearly. It was quiet, one of those calm nights where everything feels normal. I had just gotten home from work. Long day, exhausting, the kind of day where you don't want to think about anything except relaxing. I dropped my keys on the table, loosened my shoes, and sat down for a minute, just breathing, enjoying the silence. But then, that silence was broken. Knock, knock, knock. Not just any knock. It was loud, sharp, aggressive. The kind of knock that immediately makes your body tense up. For a moment, I froze, because deep down, something didn't feel right. Normal visitors don't knock like that. Friends don't knock like that. This felt different, like whoever was outside wasn't there for a friendly visit. The knocking continued, louder this time, more impatient, more demanding. And at that point, I had no choice but to get up and answer the door. As I walked toward it, I remember thinking, did something happen? Is everything okay? Because honestly, that was the only explanation that made sense. I opened the door, and that's when I saw her, Linda, standing right there, arms crossed, face tense, eyes locked on me like she had been waiting for this moment. And behind her, 2 police officers. For a second, my brain didn't process what I was seeing. Police? At my door? My first thought was, did something happen in the neighborhood? Is someone hurt? Because why else would the police be here? But then, without saying hello, without any explanation, she raised her hand and pointed at my trash can. I followed her finger, slowly, and there it was, sitting near the curb, exactly where I had left it after taking the trash out earlier. And suddenly, everything became confusing, because that was it. That was the problem. She looked at the officers and said in the most serious tone possible, "He refuses to follow HOA regulations." I just stood there, silent, trying to process what was happening, because part of me was still expecting her to say something else, something that would actually make sense. But no, that was it. That was the complaint. I looked at the officers. They looked at me. And in that moment, you could tell they were just as confused as I was. One of them stepped forward slightly and asked, "Sir, is everything okay here?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. And I said, "Yeah, I think so. I just forgot to bring the trash can in." Simple, honest, normal. That should have been the end of it, right there. A small misunderstanding, a quick explanation, everyone goes home. But no, Linda wasn't done. She started talking again, and this time, she wasn't just pointing at the trash can. She was listing things. Multiple violations, repeated non-compliance, failure to follow community standards. Her voice was firm, almost rehearsed, like she had been waiting for this moment, like she wanted this to happen. And that's when something changed inside me. Not anger, not frustration, something else. Clarity. Because in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about the trash can, not even close. This had been building up for days, for weeks. Ever since I moved into that neighborhood, things had been off. When I first bought the house, it felt like a dream,
Honestly, it was one of those moments in life where you feel like everything is finally coming together. A clean, quiet neighborhood, tree-lined streets.
Houses that looked perfect from the outside. The kind of place where everything feels calm, safe, predictable. I remember standing outside on my first day, looking around, and thinking, yeah, this is it. This is where I want to be. And of course, there was an HOA, but I didn't think much of it. In my mind, it was just part of living in a well-maintained area. Some rules, some structure, nothing extreme. Or at least, that's what I thought. The first week went by smoothly. Unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, getting used to the space. It felt good, peaceful, like I was finally settling into something stable. Then, one morning, everything started to change. I opened my front door, and there it was, a letter, placed neatly, almost deliberately. I picked it up, opened it, and read it. A warning. Apparently, my car was parked too close to the curb. I remember reading that line twice, just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. Too close? Not on the sidewalk. Not blocking anything. Not causing any issue. Just too close. I actually laughed because it felt ridiculous. Like, who even notices something like that? But I didn't think too much about it. I adjusted my parking, moved on. Then a few days later, another letter. This time, it was about my lawn. According to the notice, it wasn't evenly trimmed. Now I paused, because this one felt more personal, like someone was actually paying attention, watching closely. But still, I decided to cooperate. I fixed it, made sure everything looked perfect, and for a moment, I thought that would be enough. It wasn't, because the notices kept coming. Mailbox color, driveway condition, the angle of my trash bin, even the way my curtains looked from outside. At first, it felt random, but after a while, it started to feel targeted, like someone was watching me, not casually, but intentionally, waiting. Observing, looking for anything, no matter how small. And eventually, I found out who it was. The first time I met Linda, it didn't feel like meeting a neighbor. It felt like being evaluated. She knocked on my door one afternoon, and when I opened it, there was no smile, no greeting, no welcome to the neighborhood. Just a statement. You're not following community standards. That's how she introduced herself. No conversation, no respect, just authority. And from that moment on, everything changed. Every small thing became an issue. Every detail became a problem. Every action felt monitored. And slowly, my home, the place that was supposed to feel safe, started to feel different, restricted, controlled, watched. So when she showed up that night, with the police, over a trash can, it wasn't just annoying, it wasn't just frustrating, it was the final straw. The officers eventually stepped in. They told her clearly, this is not a police matter. And just like that, they left. No report, no warning, nothing. Just silence. And I stood there, at my door, looking out at the street, then back at my house, the place I worked for, the place I earned, the place that was supposed to be mine. And in that moment, I asked myself one simple question. Why am I tolerating this? Because deep down, I knew something wasn't right. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about order. This was about control. And that night, I made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of frustration, but out of clarity. I didn't argue. I didn't react. I didn't go back and forth. I did something else. I sat down, in silence, and I started thinking,
Because if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's this. The strongest move isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's patient. And sometimes the best response isn't immediate.
It's strategic, and that night, that's exactly what I decided to be. Here's something Linda didn't know about me. And honestly, it was the one thing that changed everything. I wasn't just a homeowner. I wasn't just some random guy who bought a house and wanted a quiet life. I was a real estate investor. For years, I had been working behind the scenes, buying properties, studying markets, watching how neighborhoods rise and how they fall. I understood patterns. I understood behavior. And most importantly, I understood power. Because in real estate, power doesn't come from who talks the loudest. It doesn't come from who complains the most. It comes from ownership. That's something most people don't realize. You can have rules, you can have titles, you can even have authority on paper, but the real control, the real influence, that belongs to the people who own the ground everything stands on. And that's when everything became clear to me. I didn't need to argue with Linda. I didn't need to fight her. I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to change the game. And once I made that decision, everything else became simple. Not easy, but simple. The very next morning, I woke up with a different mindset. No frustration, no anger, just focus. Instead of reacting, I started researching, quietly, carefully, strategically. No announcements, no conversations, no signs that anything had changed. On the outside, I was still the same resident, following the same routine, living the same life. But behind the scenes, I was paying attention. I started looking into the neighborhood, property records, listings, ownership history, market trends, and what I found was interesting, very interesting. Several homes in the area were already listed for sale. Some had been sitting on the market longer than expected. Others were about to be listed. And when I looked deeper, the reason became obvious. People were tired. Tired of the constant rules. Tired of the pressure. Tired of feeling like they couldn't even relax in their own homes. Some of them had already made up their minds to leave. Others were just waiting for the right opportunity. And in that moment, I saw something most people would miss. An opportunity. Not just to respond, but to take control. I didn't rush. I didn't act impulsively. Because this wasn't about emotion. This was about strategy. So I started small. One property. That was it. Just one. A clean purchase, quick process. No complications. And after that, nothing changed. At least, not on the surface. Then came the second property. A little further down the street. Different owner, different situation. Same quiet approach. No attention, no noise, no signals. Just progress. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, piece by piece, my presence in the neighborhood started growing. But here's the thing. No one noticed, because everything looked normal. The houses were maintained, lawns were trimmed, driveways were clean. The tenants I placed were respectful, quiet, responsible. There were no complaints, no disruptions, nothing that would raise suspicion. From the outside, it looked like nothing had changed, but behind the scenes, everything was changing. Every property I bought added something, more influence, more presence, more control. And the more I studied the HOA structure, the clearer things became. It wasn't just about owning houses. It was about understanding the system. HOAs run on votes. Decisions are made by numbers. Power is distributed through ownership. And slowly, without making any noise, I was building all three: ownership, votes, influence. Meanwhile, Linda kept doing exactly what she had always been doing: sending notices, making complaints, walking around like she controlled everything. But the difference now was, she didn't realize the ground beneath her authority was shifting. And the person she had been targeting, the one she thought she could control, was quietly becoming the most influential property owner in the neighborhood. There was one moment, I remember it clearly. I was standing outside one of the houses I had just purchased. It was late afternoon, quiet, peaceful. I looked down the street, slowly, carefully, and I started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4 properties, all connected, all under my control. And in that moment, something clicked. This wasn't just a reaction anymore. This wasn't just me responding to a problem. This was something bigger. This was a shift in power, a shift in control, a shift in the entire dynamic of the neighborhood. And the most interesting part? No one saw it happening. By the time a few more deals closed, things started reaching a tipping point. Now, I wasn't just a homeowner, I was a major presence. I owned enough properties to matter, enough to influence decisions, enough to be heard, and most importantly, enough to change things. And then, the moment came. The moment everything started to surface. Linda showed up again. Same walk, same expression, same tone. Nothing had changed, at least from her perspective. She started talking about another violation, another complaint, another issue. But this time, everything felt different. Because I wasn't frustrated, I wasn't annoyed, I wasn't defensive. I was calm, completely calm, because I knew something. She didn't. I let her talk, didn't interrupt, didn't argue, just listened. And when she finished, I smiled. Not out of disrespect, not out of arrogance, but because I knew what was about to happen next. And then I said something very simple. You might want to check the ownership records. That was it. No long explanation.
No confrontation. No emotion. Just a sentence. And for a moment, she paused. Confused. Like she didn't fully understand what I meant. But I could see it in her face. Something had shifted. For the first time, there was uncertainty. And that moment, right there, that was the beginning. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, powerful, and permanent. A few days after that conversation, everything changed. Not all at once, not in some loud, dramatic way, but slowly, quietly. You could feel it. It was in the way people looked at each other, the way conversations happened, the way silence started to disappear. And it wasn't just with Linda. It was across the entire neighborhood. Something had shifted. I remember one afternoon, I was outside, just standing near the driveway. Nothing unusual, just observing. And that's when I saw her, Linda. She was standing a few houses down, talking to another HOA member. But something was different. Her posture, her expression, her energy. She was holding a stack of documents, papers, records, and she didn't look confident anymore. She looked stressed. The same person who used to walk around like she owned everything now looked like she was trying to understand something she couldn't control. Because now, she knew. The records didn't lie. The properties she thought belonged to different people, different families, different owners, were connected. And the person behind all of them was me. That realization changed everything. Because suddenly, I wasn't just another resident anymore. I wasn't just someone she could send notices to. I wasn't just a name on a complaint list. I was a major stakeholder, a property owner with influence, with numbers, with a voice that actually mattered. And in a system like an HOA, that changes everything. Because HOAs don't run on attitude. They run on structure, on votes, on ownership. And now, I was part of that structure, a significant part. The next HOA meeting was very different. You could feel it before it even started. The room was quieter than usual, but not in a tense way, in a waiting kind of way. People were watching, observing, thinking. Linda walked in, like she always did. But this time, there was no authority in her presence.
Because now, people knew. The meeting started. Routine at first. Updates, reports, formalities. But then, something happened that hadn't happened before. Someone spoke up. Not loudly, not aggressively, but confidently. They questioned a rule. And then, another person joined. Then another. Concerns were raised, real concerns, about fines, about enforcement, about fairness. And for the first time, those concerns weren't ignored, because now there was support behind them, and I participated, not emotionally, not aggressively, calmly, clearly, confidently. I asked questions, simple ones. Why is this rule necessary? Who does this actually benefit? Is this being applied fairly to everyone? And suddenly, the conversation changed, because those questions didn't have easy answers. We started reviewing policies, line by line, looking at how rules were written, how they were enforced, how they were used. And slowly, very slowly, the structure began to shift. It wasn't instant, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Other residents, people who had stayed silent for years, finally started speaking, because now they felt safe. They knew they weren't alone. They knew someone was listening. And more importantly, they knew someone had the power to actually make a difference. Linda tried to hold her ground. She responded. She defended. She pushed back. But it wasn't the same, because authority without support doesn't last. And for the first time, she didn't have that support. The control she once had was slipping, not taken from her, but redistributed back to the community. And then, something happened that I didn't expect. A knock on my door. Not loud, not aggressive, just normal. I walked over, opened it, and there she was, Linda. But this time, she wasn't the same person. No crossed arms, no sharp tone, no authority.
She looked different, calm, quiet, and if I'm being honest, a little nervous. She asked if we could talk. And just like that, everything came full circle. We sat down, and for the first time, there was no tension, no confrontation, just a conversation. She started talking about cooperation, about understanding, about finding balance. The same person who once called the police over a trash can was now talking about compromise. And I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react emotionally. Because this was never about revenge. It was never about proving a point. It was about something much simpler. Respect. And when she finished, I told her one thing. This could have been avoided. That was it. Because it was true. None of this needed to happen. Not the conflict. Not the tension. Not the shift in power. All it would have taken was a little respect in the beginning. A conversation instead of control. But sometimes, people only understand balance after they lose control. After that, things changed. Not just on paper,
But in reality, the HOA became more reasonable. Rules were simplified. Fines were made fair. Enforcement became consistent, not selective. And slowly, the neighborhood started feeling like what it was always supposed to be. A place to live. Not a place to be controlled. Not a place to be watched. But a place where people could actually feel comfortable. Where they could exist. Without constant pressure. And the most interesting part, all of it started from something so small, so unnecessary, so avoidable. One moment, one decision, one phone call, over a trash can. Outro. If you made it this far, I want to ask you something. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have argued? Would you have ignored it? Or would you have done something different? Let me know in the comments.
And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories like this.